History is full of bizarre and mysterious legal battles where people used unexpected, shocking, or downright weird strategies to win. Here are some of the most unusual cases ever. The town that outlawed death. In 1999, a small town in Brazil pulled off one of the strangest legal stunts in history. The mayor declared it illegal to die within the city limits. Yes, you read that right. Death itself was banned. The reason? The town's only cemetery was completely full, and legal red tape had blocked its expansion. Faced with a literal deadlock, the mayor decided the only way to get the higher government's attention was to make dying illegal. The absurdity was perfect. Suddenly, the world was watching a town where citizens could technically be arrested for kicking the bucket. The stunt worked. International media coverage poured in, the story went viral, and the pressure forced the authorities to finally resolve the cemetery crisis. While no one actually faced criminal charges for dying, the law became a legendary example of creative, out-of-the-box problem-solving. It shows that sometimes the most ridiculous legal measures can be the most effective, and that politics, when mixed with absurdity, can grab the world's attention. The monkey selfie trial. In 2011, a macaque monkey in Indonesia decided to become an Instagram influencer, before Instagram even existed. How? By taking a selfie. A wildlife photographer had left his camera unattended, and the curious monkey couldn't resist pressing the shutter button, snapping a surprisingly good self-portrait. But what should have been a cute animal moment quickly turned into a courtroom drama worthy of Hollywood. The big question: who owned the photo, the photographer or the monkey? Lawyers, animal rights activists, and the press went bananas over the idea of a monkey holding copyright. Headlines like "Monkey demands royalties" and "Ape claims artistic rights" ran around the world, making people laugh, scratch their heads, or both. After years of legal wrangling, the courts decided that, sadly, animals can't hold copyright, so the photographer kept the rights. The macaque didn't get rich, but the story went viral, proving one thing: never underestimate a monkey with a camera, or the internet's love for absurd legal battles. The Great British Biscuit versus Cake Tax Trial. In 1991, the UK found itself in the middle of a courtroom showdown over one of the nation's greatest mysteries. Is a Jaffa cake a biscuit or a cake? On one side were the tax authorities, ready to slap VAT on the nation's favourite snack. On the other side was McVitie's, the proud makers of the beloved chocolate and orange treat. Millions of pounds in tax revenue and British snack pride hung in the balance. The trial quickly turned into something out of a comedy sketch. Lawyers and food experts debated the Jaffa cake's size, texture, and most importantly, what happens when it goes stale. Spoiler: cakes go hard, biscuits go soft. At one point, McVitie's even baked a giant Jaffa cake to prove that if it were a biscuit, it would be absurdly enormous. Judges, lawyers, and the public watched in bemused disbelief as pastry became the battleground for fiscal law. In the end, McVitie's won. The Jaffa cake was officially a cake, and biscuits everywhere breathed a sigh of relief. Beyond the laughs, the case highlights just how absurd bureaucracy can get, turning a simple snack into a legal and delicious battle. The McDonald's hot coffee lawsuit. In 1992, one of the most talked about lawsuits in America began with something that sounded almost silly: a spilled cup of McDonald's coffee. A 79-year-old woman in New Mexico accidentally spilled the drink on her lap, but the injuries were far more serious than anyone expected. The coffee was so hot that it caused third-degree burns, sending her to the hospital and requiring skin grafts. At first glance, many people thought it was just a frivolous lawsuit. The idea of suing a fast food chain over spilled coffee became the punchline of jokes and late-night TV. But when the case went to trial, shocking details came out. McDonald's wasn't serving normal hot coffee. Their drinks were kept at temperatures close to 190 degrees Fahrenheit, hot enough to cause severe burns in just a few seconds. In fact, the company had already received hundreds of complaints about burns before this case, yet they continued the practice. The jury was stunned. What looked like a silly claim turned out to be a story about corporate negligence and public safety. The woman was awarded damages, and the case went down in history as one of the most misunderstood lawsuits ever. For years, people joked about it, But the truth was far more serious, and it forced McDonald's and other fast food chains to rethink how dangerously hot their coffee really was. The psychic who sued NASA. In 1997, NASA was preparing one of its boldest missions, the Deep Impact Probe, which was designed to slam into Comet Tempel 1 so scientists could study its interior. But while astronomers and engineers celebrated the idea, one woman thousands of miles away in Russia was furious. Her name was Marina Bai, a self-described psychic and astrologer, and she believed NASA's comet-crashing mission wasn't just bad science, it was a cosmic crime. According to her, the explosion would violate the natural balance of the universe and, even worse, mess with her personal astrological powers. So, what did she do? She sued NASA. And not for pocket change either. She demanded $300 million in damages. Her argument? By disturbing the comet, NASA had interfered with her ability to read the stars and thrown off the cosmic order of which she was a part. At first, this sounded like the kind of lawsuit that would get tossed out immediately. But to everyone's surprise, a Moscow court actually agreed to hear the case. For weeks, the story bounced around newspapers and late-night talk shows, with headlines mocking the idea of a psychic going after America's biggest space agency. NASA officials mostly shrugged, but the publicity was a nightmare. It made the whole mission sound like some kind of mystical battle between science and the supernatural. In the end, Marina didn't win her $300 million, but she did manage to get a bizarre symbolic victory. A Russian court ordered a minor ecological agency to review the mission's potential impact, essentially saying that her complaint couldn't be dismissed outright. It wasn't a fortune, but it was enough for her to claim she'd forced the world's top scientists to answer to her spiritual concerns. The case remains one of the strangest examples of how ancient belief systems can collide with cutting-edge science. For NASA, it was just another day at the office. But for Marina Bai, it was proof that the universe and its vibes belonged in the courtroom just as much as the cosmos. The Harrier jet lawsuit. In the 1990s, Pepsi launched a promotional campaign called Pepsi Points. The idea was simple: buy Pepsi, collect points, and trade them in for prizes like t-shirts, sunglasses, or leather jackets. Pretty standard stuff, until one infamous commercial changed everything. At the end of the ad, after showing off the usual Pepsi merch, the camera cut to a high school kid landing at school in a Harrier fighter jet, a real US military attack jet, while the words popped up on screen: Harrier jet, 7 million Pepsi points. Most people laughed, but one man, John Leonard, did not. He saw it as a legitimate offer. After doing the math, Leonard realized he didn't need to drink millions of cans of Pepsi. He could just buy the points directly for about $700,000. That's a fraction of the $23 million value of a real Harrier jet. So he raised the money from investors, sent Pepsi an order form, and demanded his jet. Pepsi, of course, said no, but Leonard wasn't backing down. He sued Pepsi for breach of contract, arguing that the commercial was a real offer and that he had met the terms. Suddenly, a soda company found itself in a courtroom having to explain why they weren't handing over a supersonic war machine to a private citizen. The trial was part comedy, part corporate nightmare. Lawyers debated whether a teenager flying a fighter jet to school was a serious proposition or obviously a joke. Pepsi argued the ad was clearly humorous, especially since the Harrier jet wasn't even listed in their official prize catalogue. The judge agreed, ruling that no reasonable person would believe the commercial was offering a real military jet. Leonard lost the case, but the lawsuit became legendary, proof that sometimes people take advertising way too literally. Years later, it was even turned into a Netflix documentary showing how one man almost made Pepsi fight him over a jet, the Great Pringles Tax War. In the late 2000s, a London courtroom became the stage for one of the strangest legal battles in snack food history. The question on everyone's mind: is a Pringle really a potato chip? Procter & Gamble, the company behind the iconic curved crisps, argued that their Pringles deserved to be tax-free. Why? Because technically, they weren't potato crisps at all. In the UK, potato chips were subject to value-added tax, VAT, while basic foods were not. If Pringles could be declared a regular food rather than a crisp, they could save millions in taxes. The arguments put forward by the lawyers were almost comically detailed. they explained that Pringles were only 42% potato, with the rest made of wheat starch, corn flour, and other ingredients, meaning they weren't truly a potato product. They also pointed out that Pringles had a uniform saddle shape, unlike any natural potato slice, and came in a neat tube rather than a chaotic bag. According to Procter & Gamble, these differences made Pringles fundamentally unlike traditional potato crisps. In 2008, the company won the first round. The judge agreed that by their strict definitions, Pringles were not potato crisps. But the victory was short-lived. HMRC appealed, and in 2009, a higher court overturned the decision, declaring that, despite their doughy composition, fancy shape, and unusual packaging, Pringles were indeed crisps. The judge reasoned that the ordinary person would have no hesitation in calling a Pringle a crisp, and that was enough. Beyond the laughs, this case became a hilarious illustration of how the law can turn even the most mundane objects into epic philosophical debates. And for a brief period, the world watched as judges debated the very nature of a snack. The Pringles tax war shows how money, bureaucracy, and absurdity can collide, proving that sometimes the humblest chip can spark one of the most bizarre legal battles ever. The Seattle Bikini Barista Controversy. Between 2007 and 2017, Seattle became famous for one of the quirkiest cultural debates in recent history: the rise of the bikini baristas. At coffee stands across the city, women served drinks wearing bikinis, lingerie, or other revealing outfits, turning a morning latte into a spectacle that drew crowds, media attention, and plenty of controversy. Local governments tried to clamp down, passing strict dress code laws aimed at banning the practice, arguing that it violated public decency. But the baristas fought back, claiming that what they wore was a form of free expression and that the law unfairly targeted them. The debate soon made national headlines, with newspapers and TV stations debating the finer points of coffee, cleavage, and constitutional rights. In the end, the courts sided with the baristas, striking down the laws as unconstitutional. This wasn't just a victory for caffeine and skimpy swimsuits, it became a landmark example of how far free expression can reach, even in the most unexpected workplaces. Public reaction was mixed. Some praised the ruling as a win for individual rights, while others shook their heads at the idea of legally protected coffee cosplay. The Seattle Bikini Barista Controversy showed that even a humble cup of coffee could brew up a storm in the courtroom, proving that sometimes the fight for freedom comes with whipped cream and espresso. When a bikini top challenged the law. In 1983, Clearwater, Florida, saw one of the strangest and boldest courtroom moments of the decade. An exotic dancer had been arrested for breaking a city rule that said women had to wear bikini tops while performing. The law was supposed to protect public decency, but the dancer believed it was unfair and didn't make sense. Instead of just relying on her lawyer's arguments, she decided to prove her point in a way no one could ignore. When she showed up in court, she was wearing a bikini, the exact kind of outfit the law said was acceptable. Then, in front of the judge, she bent over to show how little coverage the bikini actually gave. The room went silent. Some gasped, others laughed nervously, and reporters immediately began scribbling down what would become tomorrow's headlines. Her message was clear. There was no real difference between wearing the bikini and the clothes she wore on stage, yet one was considered legal while the other could get her arrested. The demonstration worked. The judge agreed with her reasoning, the charges were dropped, and the case instantly became a famous example of creative courtroom defense. This incident wasn't just a funny or unusual story. It reflected the bigger cultural struggles happening in America in the late 1970s and 1980s. Across the country, many local governments and conservative groups were pushing to enforce traditional values through laws about decency, nightlife, and entertainment. At the same time, more and more people were demanding the freedom to express themselves, especially in the booming nightlife industry. The clash between old-fashioned ideas of morality and new calls for personal freedom played out in clubs, bars, and courtrooms again and again. Florida often ended up in the middle of these battles. On one hand, the state depended on tourism, with its beaches, bars, and clubs forming a big part of its economy and image. On the other hand, many communities leaned conservative and wanted stricter rules about what was allowed in public entertainment. That mix made Florida a frequent battleground for legal fights over nudity and performance laws. The Clearwater case stood out because it showed how inconsistent these laws could be. If a bikini was considered decent, then banning nearly identical attire was hard to justify. What made the case memorable was the way it revealed how decency was really a matter of perception. The dancer used the courtroom itself as a stage, and her demonstration made the law look unreasonable. It also showed that people who were often dismissed or judged, like dancers working in strip clubs, could stand up against the system and win. Even though the case didn't lead to sweeping changes in the law, it remains a striking reminder of how personal freedoms in America have often been defended in surprising and unconventional ways. The man who sued himself. One of the strangest court cases in US history involved an inmate named Robert Lee Brock, who decided to take self-accountability way too far by suing himself. He asked for $5 million, claiming that his own crimes had gone against his religious beliefs and civil rights, causing him great personal distress. Since he didn't have any money, he demanded that the state of Virginia pay the $5 million for him. When the case reached court, the judge had to deal with the odd situation of a man suing himself for money he couldn't possibly pay. In a clever and funny response, the judge dismissed the case and pointed out that Brock hadn't even explained how the court could collect the filing fee from himself. The story became instantly famous, showing that sometimes the weirdest lawsuits are also the funniest, and that's all for today. If you enjoyed these bizarre and unbelievable legal cases, make sure to like, share, and subscribe for more stories that will leave you scratching your head. Don't forget to hit the notification bell so you never miss an episode of the weirdest moments in history and law.